We should never tire or even take for granted the stories of anti-Semitism that we see on a regular basis now. It's a very deeply disturbing time we are living in. I've talked about this a lot. There seems to be sort of free pass territory in some respects, and I can never quite fathom how we've sort of arrived at a place where our forefathers post-war could never have predicted, where you're bearing in mind what had happened and what had just happened, and we were still slowly discovering back in the late 40s the extent to what had gone on during the war. And if you'd said to somebody, I don't know, fast forward to 1955, that Jews in this country would feel unsafe going shopping, crossing a road, going to a comedy show, going to university, for goodness sake. I mean, it would have been, no. The world has been through those days. It happened in Germany, you might have noticed. But here we are today. Rishi Sunak has said university leaders have a moral duty to protect Jewish students from intimidation and harassment. The Prime Minister is hosting a meeting at number 10 with Vice-chancellors from leading universities and urging them to take a zero-tolerance approach to anti-Semitism. Under government plans, universities that allow anti-Semitism on campus face being sanctioned for the first time. They will also urge the police to call be urged to call the police if any criminal acts are committed. Let's speak to student and author Dov Forman. Dov, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian. Thank you for having me on.
It's a pleasure. I almost can't believe I just had to read what I just read, to be honest. I mean, you'd think, well, isn't this a given that this is how we would deal with anti-Semitism? Wouldn't that just be an automatic response? Isn't it written in the Chancellor's rule book somewhere that this is the only response you would have? But we already know, and I've just listed a few examples, that this clearly isn't the case at the moment, and there are people who are almost being given a green light to and wearing their anti-Semitism with almost pride, it seems.
Yeah, I think you sum it up perfectly. And you asked in your introduction, how did we get to this point? I think the answer is that anti-Semitism is a light sleeper, and actually it never went away. It's a virus that throughout history has continuously and consistently mutated. They once hated us because of our ethnicity, then they hated us because of our race and our religion. Now they hate us because of our nation state. And when people say that anti-Zionism isn't anti-Semitism, it really is. On my own campus, they have a sign that says Zionist free zone. And I'm a Zionist, so where do they want me as a Jewish student to go on campus? And as you say, people have seemingly been given a green card to go ahead and show your anti-Semitism and be brazenly and openly racist, extremist and anti-Semitic out in the open on our campuses. And that's not acceptable. You know, people say that university is a place for people to develop political ideas and exercise freedom of speech, and that's right. But that has to be within the law. And that can't be at the expense of Jewish students. That can't mean that I have to go into university wearing my kippah during exam season at the moment and feel scared and frightened. And I have friends who have been intimidated on campus by these people having their protests and in their encampments, and that's unacceptable. And so chancellors, universities have to do more.
And I think you're right. It's probably always been there. There's sort of a latent form, but it's now almost legitimised in some respects. And I've said this many times. I remember a caller getting in touch and saying, you know, why do you always stand up and defend the Jews? They're doing all right. And I thought that phrase, they are, as if there's one collective of, they are doing all right, which is so overtly anti-Semitic just in its terms. That's the belief, though, isn't it? It's like, this is David and Goliath almost, and some people cannot get their head out of that particular sandpit. The Jews are doing okay, everything's good, they're running stuff, they don't need protection, they've had it good for a long time. It's the other guys that we should look after. And I don't know how such crass and offensive polarity took hold so easily, but I think you might have answered some of it there, Dov, when you say, well, it's kind of always been there, but worryingly, it's now been given this big fat green light.
Yes, and I think people are rightly passionate about what's going on in the world, when they see innocent civilians die on both sides, of course you can go out and protest. But what they don't realize is this is our lives. As a Jewish person, I can't just turn off my Jewishness.
Yeah.
And throughout history, anti-Semites, they didn't care how religious you were, if you were overtly or Jewish undercover. They didn't care. If you're Jewish, you have one piece of Jewish blood. Throughout history, you've had a price tag on your head. And I feel the same way now. So it doesn't matter if I wear my kippah or not. I'm a proud Jewish person. I'm not going anywhere. I will not be cowed, and I'm not Jewish trembling knees. But what's for sure is that those people want to see me suppress my Judaism. And they have this image of a good Jew. Sometimes you hear that there are Jews on these protests, but they only allow you to join these protests if you're a good Jew in their eyes and someone who has the same values or the same views as them. Yeah. And those views are profoundly anti-Jewish, anti-Israel, and actually fundamentally anti-West as well.
Is it because these people, I alluded to it a second ago, Dov, is it because they think they're punching up in these kind of arguments? Is that crudely put where they stand? Because the very people that are the problem here, and I'm not talking necessarily about Muslims. In fact, perhaps more curiously, it's really the group of non-Muslims and that hold those views that I find more difficult to understand. But their sentiment seems to be that this is the all-powerful Jewish lobby, Israel. It's up there. There's this curious triangle of evil that's the United States, the United Kingdom, and Israel. And forget the horrendous medieval death cults that exist around the world and the all manner of human rights abuses. Anything that those three countries do, particularly Israel, is up for discussion and should be put under the spotlight. But everything else, we'll just politely ignore that, and we won't protest outside any embassies, despite horrendous things happening to Muslims in China, Muslims in being kicked out of Pakistan. I mean, the list goes on. You know all of this. But is it the Israel thing that is the driving force behind this?
Look, I think, as you say, you sum it up perfectly in that so many people hold Israel to a double standard, to a standard that isn't expected of any other country. But you know what? That's actually, Israel's the only democracy in the Middle East that, for example, when they mistakenly killed some aid workers, they do an internal investigation. You wouldn't get that in any other country. And that's why I'm proud to be a Zionist, because they are a country who will make a mistake and they will own up to that, and they will do an investigation, whereas other countries won't. And people who are on these student rallies, I speak to them in my university, at least I try to, before they don't want to engage in any discussion. But they're getting their news from TikTok. They watch one video on Instagram or TikTok and they think they're an expert on the Middle East.
Yeah, it's disturbing.
A whole year studying, and they can never understand. And you hear these people screaming genocidal chants, screaming they want an intifada here in the United Kingdom. We've seen what an intifada might mean in the United Kingdom with the London Bridge bombings, with the Manchester terror attacks, with the London Bridge terror attacks. These are things which happened in the early 2000s when there were an intifada in Israel. Innocent civilians being murdered. Is that what these students on university campuses really want against students like myself on UCL, for example? I don't think so, but I think they don't understand what they're chanting. And so many of them, when you ask them what river and what sea are you chanting about when you use the genocidal chant of from to the sea, they can't answer.
They got no idea at all. And I said at the beginning of this that, if you'd have spoken to people in the 1950s after the war and what had happened, they would have said, no, all that will be gone by then. We won't be, we won't live in a world where people will be giving people a hard time because they happen to be Jewish. I know you have your own backstory as well of Holocaust survival in your own family. So I would imagine that analogy that I gave, or that example I gave a second ago, is very prevalent to somebody like yourself. And you're not alone in that, of course.
Yes, my great-grandmother survived Auschwitz. She's still alive. She's 100 years old. She has 5 generations of proud Jewish children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and now a great-great-grandchild as of a few months ago. But she never imagined when she came to the United Kingdom to start her new life, a country where when she came here was a place where they valued religion, where they valued people being openly Jewish and other minorities too. She never imagined that only 50 years later, she would walk down the streets in fear at times, especially over the weekends, that her grandchildren would fear going into university. She always says that the great litmus test of post-Holocaust emancipation was supposed to be whether her grandchildren of Holocaust survivors, young Jewish people, could learn in freedom like everyone else on university campuses, because that's what was stripped away first from her when she was a child in Hungary, and also to those in Germany and across Eastern Europe. And we've now failed in that test because Jewish students don't feel safe. Jewish people don't feel safe on the streets on the weekends. And there are many people who have to be held to account to that. And there's a lot of work to be done to make sure that we feel as a Jewish community that we're safe on our streets, that we are valued just like you and everyone else.
Spot on. Listen, Dov, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. So we will talk again, I hope. Dov Forman, who's a student and author, very powerful stuff.